Good evening, and welcome to Sleepless Historian. You're in a quiet place now, made for slow stories, soft thoughts, and peaceful sleep. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let the day gently fade away. Tonight, we'll explore the quieter side of history, simple lives, strange old customs, and forgotten moments that shape the world in quiet ways. If this calm journey brings you peace or helps you rest, feel free to like or subscribe, only if it feels right now. Close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The monastery that vanished, a silent collapse in the Alps, whispering stones and snowfall. Good evening, friends. Dim your lights. Let the hush of twilight settle in around you. The world can wait. You're safe. Now, wrapped in warmth, held in quiet, feel the slow rise and fall of your breath. Let your shoulders soften. Nestle into the gentle rhythm of this night. Tonight, we'll wander slowly into a forgotten fold of time across powdered slopes, through conifer forests thick with snow, to a mountaintop cloaked in mystery. If this slow journey brings you peace, tap like and subscribe, like if it feels right now. Close your eyes if you wish. Let your ears listen. We begin with a trail almost too old to remember. The path to Oberwald. You find yourself walking a faint trail. There's crunch beneath your feet, fresh snow layered over centuries of rock and pine needles. You're somewhere in the eastern Alps, maybe near the cusp of Switzerland or the Tyrol. The exact place isn't clear. Even modern maps seem to avoid it. The year is around 1370, though dates, like footprints in snowfall, may drift and vanish. The air is sharp, but not cruel. You feel it fill your lungs with a tingling clarity. High above you, the mountains are old, their white peaks blinking in and out of cloud cover. The soundscape is soft, wind through fir trees, the gentle groan of distant avalanches, and the muffled hush of falling snow. You're following a pilgrim's path, though no one remembers who first carved it. Traders once used this trail. Monks, shepherds, now it's almost forgotten. You round a bend and see it. A stone archway, weathered and lichen-stained, jutting from a slope as if growing out of the mountain itself. Beyond it, barely visible through the firs, are the ruins of something that was once sacred. A monastery. This is Oberwald Abbey, or rather, what remains of it. 2. A foundation in Silence-Board Abbey was once known as Sancta Tranquilla, the Abbey of Saint Quietude. Records of it are so few, many historians believed it to be a folk tale. Only in the 1960s did a team of amateur archaeologists rediscover it entirely by accident, while following up on a rumor about a singing stone in the Tyrolean highlands. But in the late 14th century, this abbey was real, built from dark, chiseled gneiss and nestled against the curve of a glacial outcrop. It had no roads leading to its only narrow footpaths. Its founders were Benedictine, but there were whispers that the monks there had separated from the wider order. They were contemplatives, absolute devotees to silence. No speaking, save for prayer. No written correspondence, save for copying scripture. Visitors were not welcomed. No hospitality was offered, save to those who arrived already knowing the proper psalm to recite. The abbey never appeared in official registries. The Pope never sanctioned its construction. And yet, it functioned quietly for nearly 60 years. 3. Life in the Abbeyure, standing now inside the main cloister. Snow carpets, the tiled courtyard, and broken arches surround you like the ribs of a sleeping beast. Imagine what this place once sounded like, not the silence of abandonment, but the stillness of intention. The silence of 20 or so men who chose to let go of speech. Their world was filled with soft sounds, the grinding of grain in the morning, the rustle of robes, the light clink of chalices being arranged before dawn, mass. In the scriptorium, long, narrow desks faced the rising sun. Here, monks would sit for hours, transcribing texts by candlelight ben in the day. The windows were narrow. Cold fingers would steady themselves on parchment, and the only noise was the scratch of quills, the turning of vellum. The faint crackle of the fire kept low to preserve wax. Meals were taken in the refectory in strict silence, marked by the toll of a handmade bella bell that, curiously, has never been found among the ruins. Pottage with root vegetables, dark bread, sometimes goat cheese, always a mug of watered wine. It was said that the abbey grew a rare form of blue-green cabbage that caused vivid dreams. Though no one has found seeds or samples, they rose before sunrise, prayed by candlelight, labored in the gardens, copied scripture. Their rhythm was steady, soft and slow like the breath of the mountain itself. IV. Disappearances and doubt then. Without warning, the monastery vanished. Not exploded. Not destroyed by war or fire. Not taken over by raiders or wolves. It simply ... stopped. The last known reference to the abbey appears in a land lease dated to 1374, describing Oberwald's north path past the stone monks. The next year, there is nothing, no more references, no tax records, no accounts from travelers. By 1380, local shepherds avoided the area entirely, calling it the place where the snow sings. Some claimed they saw lights in the trees, or that voices oft mournful chants could be heard on moonless nights. The nearest village priest reportedly tried to visit in 1381, but turned back after finding dozens of dead sparrows neatly laid in a circle at the trail's entrance. Others dismissed the rumors. After all, monks were known to retreat. Perhaps they simply went elsewhere. But there were no farewell letters, no signs of relocation, no remains, just the wind unearthing the cold in the 1960s. A small group of enthusiasts, part-time historians, really used old Tyrolean legends to guide them through the backcountry. They had heard of the frozen bell, the breathless hill, and the mountain of quiet monks. After days of hiking and snowshoeing, they came upon the ruins, low stone walls, collapsed roofs, a half-buried circular garden shaped like a labyrinth, an ossuary with empty niches. There were no gravestones, no bones, no tools. But there was one peculiar find, a room deep beneath the ruins, accessed only by descending a narrow spiral staircase chiseled directly into the bedrock. This substructure was not marked on any Benedictine plans. Inside, the walls were lined with niches and, in each niche, a small ceramic vessel. Every vessel was sealed with wax. When later examined in Vienna, they found slips of parchment bearing a single word written in Latin. The words were ordinary: water, stone, hunger, light, wool, breath. No one knows their purpose, why, what the snow hides and. So, you find yourself standing again at the edge of this ruined sanctuary, centuries later, listening to the wind murmur between its stones. The mystery remains. Where did the monks go? Was it an avalanche that buried the man, act of nature so swift it left no trace? Was it a pact of silence that became something else's spiritual seclusion that turned into a vanishing act? Or did they simply fade because they wished choosing not to be remembered? There is something hauntingly peaceful about a place that doesn't shout its history, it simply waits, unfolding slowly, like frost on glass, unresolved and ever so quiet. The last winter and the Keeper of Keys *, the snow began early that year. Long before the last leaves had fallen from the trees lining the narrow path to Oberwald Abbey, the first snowflakes drifted silently down, not in a storm, but a slow, soft whisper from the sky, just enough to leave a fine crust of white over the thatched roofs of the cloister buildings. By the time the high passes were impassable, the abbey had entered its final winter, and yet no one at the time would have known this. I, the monk. With no name, there are few surviving documents that mention Oberwald Abbey directly. But in the Cathedral of Chur, nestled in the Greisenalps far, to the west, a record exists of a monk referred to only as Custos Clavium, the Keeper of the Keys. The record is brief. It speaks of a man who arrived barefoot one spring morning in 1376, wrapped in a travel-stained robe, his feet torn. And bleeding, he requested no food and spoke no words. But when he was handed a quill, he wrote just 4 things: Sancta tranquilla nan est, mi culpa nan mi culpa, clavis est, and a final phrase that, even now, scholars debate, audient qui silierunt, they hear, who were silent. The phrase was written not in standard ecclesiastical Latin, but in a dialect rarely used outside Alpine monasteries. There is no other record of this monk. He vanished from the cathedral within 2 nights, but some believe he was the last living member of the Abbey.ii candles that do not burn in what remains of the subterranean chamber beneath the abbey ruins. Wax residue was found, wax in patterns, suggesting candles had once ringed the circular space. But there was no soot on the stone, no discoloration above the candle marks, and no trace of flame or smoke. It was as if the candles had never been lit, and yet there was wax measurable, tangible. This has puzzled modern scholars. Some suggest it was symbolic, candles molded and set but never burned as an act of ritual. Restraint. Others believe they were lit with oil-soaked threads, replaced each day. Never long enough to leave soot, but in the margins of one recovered page, nearly rotted through an almost invisible line, was found in iron gall ink: we wait without light, for light remembers. It's written in the hand of someone different from the main scribe, tighter, smaller, possibly a novice monk, possibly the Keeper of Keys. 3. The herbalist's box from the monastery garden. Only one object survived intact: a small, carved, walnut box found beneath the root of a collapsed yew tree. The box contained dried remnants of herbs, wrapped in vellum, though most of the matter had decayed into dust. One stalk remained dried, blackened, but identifiable. It was Mandragora officinarum mandrake, a powerful plant in medieval herbal medicine. Mandrake was used both to induce sleep and to silence pain. In some cases, it was used in rituals to enter dream states, or even to simulate death. It was feared and revered. And here, in a monastery that disappeared without a word, where silence was everything, it sat in a box marked only by the carved symbol of a closed eye. One theory, never formally published, suggests that the monks may have engaged in collective dreaming ritualized states of induced stillness, aided by plants like mandrake and monkshood, to retreat deeper into themselves. But there is no way to prove this, only stories, for the winds. Dire in a local village, 2 valleys away long, known for its wood-turners and barley. Fields there is a family who claims descent from a silent brother of Oberwald. The Kellen family dot in their attic, wrapped in oilcloth and stored inside a hollowed beam, was found a single folio, handwritten, unsigned, and badly damaged by mildew. The language is archaic German, mixed with ecclesiastical Latin, suggesting it was written by someone with training, but who no longer adhered to monastic grammar. The entries are sparse and not dated. The snow arrived like breath. We do not speak of what we see now in the trees. The bell rang last night, but we buried the clapper last spring. Brother Justice hums. We cannot stop him. The labyrinth holds the voice. It repeats us. I have burned my name. The keys are gone. Each entry is followed by a crude sketch, a ring of candles, a bell with no rope, a circle of trees, a cloaked figure with a key in its mouth. Whether the diary is authentic remains uncertain, but the parchment dates to the late 14th century, and the ink matches that of recovered documents from the ruins. V. The missing monastic. Bells were crucial to daily life, marking the hours for prayer, labor, study, and sleep. But no trace of Oberwald's bell has ever been found. Yet multiple witnesses over the centuries have claimed to hear a deep, low chime when walking the path near the abbey ruins. The sound never repeats. It seems to come from the stones themselves. 1. Mountaineer in 1923, making a solo winter ascent nearby, reported in his journal, around dusk. As I reached the northern ridge, I heard a bell ring once. Clear, heavy. It came from below the snow. I looked back. There was nothing. Only footprints. Mine. He survived the climb. But later, at a cafe in Innsbruck, he fell into a strange silence. Witnesses say he stopped speaking altogether and took to writing notes to communicate till his death from pneumonia 2 years later. One of his final notes, preserved by his niece, reads, "They do not speak because they remember. They do not return because they are still listening." Vi, vanishing as devotion. And now, dear listener, you sit quietly in the imagined warmth of the abbey's last winter. The fire in the stone hearth would have glowed gently, casting slow, flickering light across the walls. The monks, robed in wool, dyed with walnut husks, would move slowly, deliberately bowing before each other, never speaking. They may have believed that words invited the world in. That sound was a kind of violence, even if unintentional. So they retreated, layer by layer, word by word, until even their names were set down in ink and burned. Until even the bell, their last sound, was buried. It is possible, just possible, that the Abbey of St. Quietude vanished not by disaster, but by choice. That each monk prepared for disappearance like a final rite, that they faded so fully into silence that time forgot them. And now you know, not everything lost was taken. Some things simply let go. The labyrinth below and the last breath of stone, asterisk, the mountains, at night. Remember, not in words or memories as we do, but in something slower, something deeper. They remember in the way roots remember the warmth of summer long after snow has settled, or how stone holds the print of hands that once shaped it centuries before, and buried beneath one such mountain. Beneath the crumbling ribs of Oberwald Abbey lies something we were never meant to find. A place not drawn on any plan. A room with no windows. A corridor with no exit. A labyrinth that remembers in silence. The labyrinth's entrance it was. not discovered by monks, nor by villagers, not even the amateur. Archaeologists of the 20th century found it. It was a boy in 1987, a teenager named Elias, visiting his grandmother's village in the Alps, wandered up the old footpath on a dare. The locals still spoke of the stone monks, though few could point out where the ruins were anymore. Elias didn't find the cloister right away. Instead, after slipping on a patch of frost and falling into a thicket, he landed against something. Hollow, stone partially buried beneath root and soil formed an arch low to the ground, almost like the top of a small doorway. Brushing away leaves, he found steps. His grandmother said he came back pale, silent, refused to sleep indoors for a week, wouldn't say what he saw. Only years later, as a man, he drew it. The spiral, and the salt his sketch was primitive. Charcoal. On parchment, but distinct. He remembered a stairwell spiraling down for far longer than expected, carved of slick, damp rock, worn smooth by feet that must have once passed in ritual. At the base, a wide space, circular, like a rotunda. Around the walls were dozens, perhaps hundreds of markings etched directly into the stone. But no writing, no symbols, just shallow cup marks. Some held dried seeds, some held tiny bones burnt, mouse, or maybe squirrel. Some were filled with crystals of what looked like salt in the center of the room. A depression in the floor formed a sunken circle, rimmed with iron fragments and crumbling wax. He did not stay long. A noise, not quite, a voice, seemed to move through the stones like wind exhaling through a pipe organ long since broken. He ran ritual or requiem. The existence of such subterranean labyrinths is not unheard of in medieval religious architecture. They appear in cathedrals, Chartres, Reims, Amiens, symbolic paths of pilgrimage, but those were meant to be walked above ground, in light, in public. This space was different. Some historians have proposed that it served as a conversio chamber, a sacred site for final vows, or acts of silent self-removal. Not death, necessarily, but transformation. The monks may have taken turns entering the labyrinth as a kind of spiritual retreat, fasting and dreaming alone for days. One hypothesis, preserved in a letter by Father Hermann Kruger in 1902, suggests that the labyrinth was where the monks went to forget themselves, to abandon memory. He called it Kammer der Vergessenheit, the chamber of forgetting, a ritual space designed not to commemorate, but to erase. 4. The wax tablets in 1999, after local conservation efforts began to stabilize the upper ruins. A team from the University of Basel uncovered fragments of wax tablets stored in a collapsed niche beside the chapel's western wall. Most were melted beyond recovery, but a few bore faint impressions lines carved into cooled wax with a stylus. What little was legible included: Domini, audi silentium, meum Lord, hear my silence. Quote, orders sine bosse. How many hours without voice? No. Suum frangia, to break one's own name. These fragments are some of the last known direct writings from the monks themselves. They suggest a level of asceticism bordering on the extreme, a devotion to silence that sought to rupture the self entirely. No identities, no titles, no past, only prayer, only QUIE echoes in the valley of now. Villagers speak of strange occurrences near the trail. A retired hunter swears that his dog refuses to follow past a certain bend. A woman collecting pine resin claims she heard low chanting three voices, humming, just beyond her sight. Children, in particular, report the sense of being watched, but not in fear, more like someone waiting, a presence that listens. Paranormal investigators have made the trek, of course. Cameras freeze. Recordings come back with static that loops. One captured a single phrase, whispered in Latin, repeated softly for 3 hours. Nan sum, I am not vi. The final reflection, what does it mean to choose silence so fully that you vanish? To remove yourself, not just from the world, but from memory. To shed identity like an old robe-name, speech, sound and descend into a place where only quiet remains. Perhaps the monks of Oberwald sought peace beyond what their age could comprehend. In a century riddled with war, plague, and spiritual panic, they carved out a haven not of stone, but of silence. A silence so complete it became indistinguishable from disappearance. Maybe they did not die, not in the way we understand it. Maybe they found stillness, a stillness that now lingers in frost, in ruined arches, in the hush between snowfall and maybe, just maybe, when the wind sighs just right, and you stand perfectly still, you too might hear it, that faint chime beneath your feet, that breath that never ends, that silence that remembers. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 2, The Nameless Princess, buried, masked, and unclaimed the girl in the Bronze Veil, asterisk. Good evening, again, ... The firelight is dim now. A soft amber glow flickering against the corners of your imagination. You're still here safe, unhurried. Let the hum of the day dissolve. Let your breath slow, as if matching the rhythm of another time. We're going somewhere quiet once more, to a land of snow and steppe, of long winters and endless songs. A land where legends were recorded on birch bark, where palaces were lined with fur and felt, and where one young royal was buried with no name, no title, only a strange bronze, mask and centuries of silence. This is the tale of the nameless princess, and our journey begins along a cold river bend. In the shadows of forgotten towers, the frozen tomb of Chinga's Valley Hour setting, is the far reaches of medieval Mongolian ear, the Altai Mountains, where the rolling grasslands meet the jagged white peaks. It is around the year 1260 CE, during the late stages of the Mongol Empire's most expansive period. The empire, forged by Genghis Khan and expanded by his descendants, stretched across Asia, bridging cultures from Korea to Hungary. But here, in a quiet northern province rarely mentioned in records, an astonishing discovery would not occur until centuries later. In 1993, while excavating a burial mound long believed to be an ordinary Kirken one of thousands across the Eurasian team of archaeologists unearthed something unusual. The outer stones were laid with precision. The inner chamber was lined with silk from the Song dynasty, and atop the body was a mask not gold, not cloth, but hammered bronze, a full-face funerary, veil stylized and expressionless, with no inscriptions. Beneath it lay the remains of a teenage girl, perfectly preserved. To what the mask conceals the bronze veil was unlike anything recorded from Mongol, Chinese, or Persian burial traditions. Its craftsmanship suggested wealth, but its materials suggested restraint. Bronze, not gold, delicate but utilitarian. The girl's body, according to forensic analysis, was around 14 to 16 years old. Her bones bore no signs of disease or injury. Her hair, braided and preserved under layers of silk and fur, was black and threaded with what appeared to be beetle wing casing anesthetic. sometimes seen in Central Asian tribal adornment. She wore layers of robes from different regions, an undergarment of Heaton linen, a second layer dyed with Persian indigo, an outer robe lined with Arctic fox fur. Her boots were made for travel soft-soled and waterproofed with birch tar. Yet there were no weapons, no horse trappings, no jewelry, no nameplate, no clan markers. It was as if she had been erased, then preserved, a paradox in silk, I, the language of birch bark nabai. In a small wooden box sealed with wax resin, researchers found slivers of birch bark inscribed with angular characters, possibly early Yugur or Tangat script. The writing was fragmentary, faded, and nearly unreadable. One phrase, however, was reconstructed: "She sleeps because the winds no longer call." Another fragment referenced the fifth daughter of No Moon, an obscure poetic form that may denote a lunar calendar or a ritual date. The fragments may have once been part of a eulogy, or perhaps notes to a scribe who never finished his task. The significance of the fifth daughter remains debated among scholars. Some believe it referred to a hidden lineage, possibly a royal child born of a concubine or a bride exchanged between clans in secret, a life conceived in politics, erased in history. Why bury a princess without a name? In the Mongol world, power and memory were often tied to mobility, not permanence. Royal women, while powerful, were often married, off to form alliances. Their children could be folded into other tribes or dynasties, often disappearing from the genealogies of their fathers. But this girl's burial was special. She was not cremated. She was not interred with the symbols of marriage. There were no heirlooms, no sutras, no clan banners. And yet, the site was revered, ringed by animal bones in a careful spiral, facing east toward the ancient mountain gods. So who was she? Some theories include a daughter of Kublai Khan whose mother may have fallen out of favor, a hostage child raised in comfort but never trusted, a religious initiate whose vows required secrecy even in death, or an oracle, a girl whose dreams were said to foretell disasterberry to keep her silence eternal. But no records confirm any of these. Just the tomb, just the mask, just silence. Echoes of her voice in oral tradition, the region surrounding. The tomb holds a song still sung in rare festivals by elder women. It's a lullaby, low and lilting, in a dialect few younger people remember. Translated roughly, it says, "Sleep, child of winds and whispers. The hoofbeats pass, the banners fall. In hills of stone, you'll wear no crown, but silence keeps you whole." No one claims the song refers to the tomb, and yet when the melody is hummed beside the burial site, some claim the wind shifts, the air becomes still, the grass leans inward, as if something long buried is listening. Stillness at the end of the step. You stand now at the edge of the tomb, centuries later. The sun is low, the grass is long and pale. There is no road here, just space. So much space, it feels like the sky itself presses down gently upon you. The tomb has been resealed. The bronze mask sits in a museum in Ulaanbaatar under glass, UNBLINKING. No further remains were found nearby. No companion graves, no inscriptions, only silence and the mask. You wonder what it means to be remembered without a name, to be preserved so precisely, so reverently, and yet never spoken of again. Was she a mistake, a threat, a treasure, or something else entirely? Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only sat beside, in stillness, for a while. The horse that never rode, and the queen without mourning asterisk. The stars above the steppe are uncommonly bright. There are no city lights, no towers, no buzz of human restlessness, just the hum of grass, the low breathing of the earth, and constellations that have watched over the land for millennia. Somewhere beneath those stars lies a tomb carved with care, and in that tomb sleeps someone we still do not understand. The girl with no name, the princess with no procession. Tonight, let's go deep into the ground, but into the folds of meaning buried around her, into what is missing as much as what was left behind. The absent horse. One of the most startling aspects of the nameless princess's burial is this: there was no horse. This might seem insignificant till you understand that, for Mongol royalty and nobility, the horse was essential, not merely transport, not merely a symbol, but a partner in life and in death. Men and women alike were buried with horses, sometimes one, sometimes several, sometimes with tack and saddle, sometimes even with the tail braided and adorned. But here, in this isolated mound, there is no trace of equine remains, no leather, no hoofprint, not even a carved symbol. Why would they bury a girl of such wealth, such obvious care, without her horse? Was it intentional? Was she denied one? Or was the omission symbolic? A modern historian, Balorma Erdene, proposed a theory. To withhold a horse is to deny the journey. In other words, this was not a burial meant to escort her to the afterlife. It was meant to hold her here, a spiritual quarantine, not cruel, but reverent, as if her story was unfinished. 2. The Echoing Chamber in 2005. New ground-penetrating radar studies revealed something peculiar beneath the tomb chamber, an echoing cavity, roughly oval in shape, located just beneath the central coffin. This was no natural cave. Its shape was too precise. No one has excavated it fully, but seismic imaging suggests it is lined with stone and clay. Possibly a second chamber, empty or filled with air. Some archaeologists theorize it's a symbolic womb space created, not to be entered, but to represent rebirth. Others suggest it's a sound chamber, built to resonate with chants or drums. Still others think it may have once contained an object long since looted or collapsed. But the most curious observation came from an audio engineer who visited the site unofficially. When he hummed low tones near the sealed mound, he reported feeling the vibrations shift like a wave changing direction, as if something deep below was shaped to hold sound and reflect it like an instrument designed never to be heard. The queen who did not mourn every great burial has echoes in court life. And yet, if this girl was of royal blood, if she was indeed a princess, or daughter of nobility, where was the mourning? Contemporary records from the Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368, which ruled China during the time of the Mongol Empire, list dozens of deaths in court, especially of imperial women. Their funerals were marked with processions, edicts, poetry, and sometimes whole months of mourning. No such records match the time of the nameless princess's death. Even more strangely, during the precise decade when her death likely occurred, c. 1260 to 1270, there is a gap in recorded births among certain branches of the royal family. Court document from 1265, written in elegant Mongolian script, references the folding of the tent in silence, a phrase that, according to poet scholars, may mean a burial without announcement. It's possible this girl's death was meant to be forgotten or hidden, not erased, not shamed, but cloaked like a secret no one wanted to tell but couldn't bear to leave behind, for the veil itself lets return to the bronze veil. Imagine holding it, cold yet finely made, shaped not with crude hammers, but with deliberate, layered work, tiny taps, softened edges, almost anatomical curves to match a young woman's face. There are no holes for eyes, just shallow indents, no mouth, no nose opening. It was not meant for breath. Some scholars believe this veil was never meant to be worn in life, or even laid atop the face at burial, but that it was a ritual object, something crafted by those who buried her, perhaps as an offering or symbol of voiceless. In several Central Asian shamanic traditions, bronze is associated with spiritual shielding. It mutes the soul so that it cannot be summoned or disturbed. If the mask was meant to shield her pretty why, was her voice considered dangerous, or was her silence considered sacred? The Whisper Skins in 2010. A fragmentary discovery near the burial site added new mystery. Tucked into a weather-worn cairn 20 meters downslope was a tightly rolled bundle of hideskin, softened and blackened with age. Inside were traces of what may have once been ink. Microscopic analysis revealed markings in Old Tangut, script unusual for the region, but not impossible, given trade routes. The markings were too faded to translate completely, but the word sutua appears several times, a term associated with hushed or held breath. Some historians speculate that these were whisperskins, ritual items used in certain northern tribes to carry the prayers or last words of the dead, especially children or young brides who died before naming ceremonies. If true, it could mean this girl was buried with the words she never got to say, not on scrolls or stone, but on softened skin, folded and forgotten. The tomb is breathing, and so you stand again beside her tomb. The grasses bend in wind, the mountains hold their silence, and below your feet, in stone and shadow, lies a girl whose story was carefully covered, but never fully hidden. We may never know her name, but someone did, once. Someone brushed her hair and wove in beetle casings. Someone chose those boots. Someone braided the leather straps and folded the linen. Someone grieved but quietly. No drums, no banners, just a bronze veil, a hollow space, and a song that still drifts across the steppe, hummed by old women who do not remember. Why not all royalty leaves legacies? Some leave only questions, some leave only stillness, and in that stillness, perhaps she rests best of all. In the silence of her name, the cold wind has settled now. You find yourself at twilight again, gazing out over a broad, windswept plain. The sky is a pale violet curtain pulled over the horizon, and the scent of steppe grasses and faint birch. Smoke drifts softly on the air. All around, the land breathes quietly, untouched and unbothered by centuries. Somewhere beneath this vastness, a single soul sleeps. The girl with no name, a princess, perhaps. A dreamer, perhaps. Perhaps just a girl who died before the world knew what to make of her. This is her final story, not of her life, which we cannot fully know, but of what she left behind, and how her silence shaped those who remained. The watchtower that vanished roughly 5 kilometers from the burial site, near a high ridge that overlooks both the river and the tomb. There once stood a wooden WATCHTOWER, We know this from a 17th century Mongolian hunting map discovered in 1974. Etched onto stone and accompanied by bronze tokens, the tower mark, only by a glyph resembling an eye, was noted as the place of last sight. When archaeological teams searched the ridge in the 1990s, they found remnants of thick post holes and shards of charred timber. Carbon dating placed the structure's destruction at around 1270, within the margin of error of the girl's presumed death. No known military actions occurred in the region that year. There were no raids, no documented tribal conflicts, so why would a watchtower burn? One theory suggests it was part of the funeral rite, a signal fire, a final act of concealment. Others suggest it was an erasure-run attempt to close off the site and all it represented. The tower watched the valley, and then it dinned. The widow's tent Mongol tradition included the use of black tent scare structures draped in dark cloth for women in mourning. These tents were symbols of sorrow and isolation, and often placed away from the main camp. Widows, especially those of high rank, would live in them for a lunar cycle or longer, depending on custom. In a folktale preserved in the oral histories of the Darkad Valley, an unnamed widow sets up a tent in the crook of the eagles, shoulder believed to refer to a ridge shaped like a bird's wing, and lived there with her daughter, refusing to speak to anyone for 13 moons. The daughter is said to vanish. On the first day of the 14th, no names are given. The tale ends with the widow sewing her own mouth closed and walking into the forest, never to return. Could this be a distant echo of the real burial? Could the nameless princess have had a mother who mourned quietly, away from courtier by choice or necessity? The sorrow of the steppe is often carried in story, not in stone. 3. The sleeping lake to the north of the tomb lies a small, glacial-fed lake. Locals call it Uskian Namar, or the water of autumn, because it is said to never fully thaw. Not even at midsummer there is no shrine near it, no road, but legend holds that the lake reflects only the truth of what you carry in your heart. Elders in the nearby village of Sagan-Gal sometimes tell travelers, if you've forgotten something, it will show you. If you haven't, it will wait. Several expeditions to the lake have reported strange phenomena, fog forming even on clear days, sounds of weeping on the wind, shadows that do not align with the sun. In 2003, a linguist studying disappearing Mongolic dialects claimed she heard someone singing in tangled verse while she walked alone by the shore. There was no one else present. She recorded nothing, but later translated what she remembered as, "My name was once a blade of grass. It bends, it breaks, it grows no more." Perhaps the lake remembers her. Perhaps it remembers the name she no longer wore. The archive that lost its page in the Royal Archives of Karakoram, the once glorious capital of the Mongol Empire. Scrolls were stored in ironwood chests lined with silk and sheepskin. These records included marriage pacts, lineages, dowries, and letters between the ruling families. One scroll damaged by fire during the 1380s refers to an unnamed daughter of the Northern Wind offered as part of an alliance between two powerful clans. The recipient refused, citing an old omen. The scroll notes, "She was too early, or we too late. The silence is sealed." This entry is unlike the others. It offers no names, no tribes, no clear date, but it bears the red ink of royal scribes, meaning it was treated as official history. A daughter refused. A silence sealed. Was this our nameless princess? If so, She may have been born as a bridge between powers, and buried as a wall between stories. V. The memory of metal, the bronze veil, removed from the burial site and preserved in a controlled environment, continues to baffle metallurgists. Alloy is typical for the period, but the craftsmanship is not. Fine etchings on the interior curve of the mask were recently revealed using ultraviolet light. The markings are not decorative. They appear to be etch marks or counting strokes. Grouped in patterns of 5 dots, there are 33 groups, 165 strokes in all. No known Mongol funerary tradition corresponds to this number. Some suggest it may be a death calendar, a countdown, or count up. Others propose it was a list, each mark representing something said or left unsaid. One researcher, a specialist in shamanic symbolism, noted that the pattern vaguely mirrors a chant cycle used in female-led rituals among certain ancient steppe cultures where each verse was accompanied by a breath, a beat, a silence. In this theory, the marks are not numbers, they are silences, held in metal, preserved like prayer, vi. The quiet legacy end. So, dear listener, we come to the end, not of her story, because that story was ended before it could truly begin, but of what she left us, the silence of her grave, the mask that hides more than it reveals, the stories, fractured and retold, that try to guess at, her sorrow and her strength. Some say her name was wiped away to protect her. Others say she was never meant to be known, chosen, to be buried not with memory, but with mystery, and still she sleeps. 1,000 years from now, someone may find Moran, amulet, a page, a breath trapped in wax, or maybe not. Maybe the only legacy she needed was the stillness she chose. The steppe holds her now. The grasses fold around her. The sky wears no crown, but bears her veil. And you who have listened so patiently, so softly carry her, too, for to remember someone unnamed is a kind of naming dot to pause. In silence is to sing their song, even if the wind is the only one who hears. And now, let's drift into a new corner of forgotten history. Story 3. The bell that rang without a rope, echoes in a haunted cathedral, a toll in the fog, good evening again. Friend, the fire is low, and the hush of night deepens. Let the stillness find you. Let your limbs grow heavy beneath your blanket, and your thoughts settle like dust upon ancient stone. Tonight, our steps echo softly across weathered flagstones. We are in a city of stone towers and drifting fog, in a cathedral where the great bell once rang with no hand to pull it, where the faithful feared the sound, and priests prayed not for souls, but for silence. Let us begin beneath that cold, hollow dome. Let us hear the toll that has no source. The city of London Wicker journey begins in the 11th century at the edge of Saxon rule, in a place that would one day become London. But this was Londonwick, a port settlement along the Thames, wedged between Roman ruins and Saxon market stalls. The city was a confluence of culture's old gods, new churches, and travelers who brought stories from as far as the Abbasid, Caliphate, and the Viking North. At the center of the settlement stood a peculiar structure, not a castle, not a marketplace, but a church that looked out of place. Its stones were darker, its arches steeper, its nave longer than any surrounding chapel. They called it St. Leontis of the Rain, though no saint by that name exists in the hagiographies. Some say the name was a mistranslation of a Breton bishop. Others whisper that Lintis wasn't a name but a warning. Regardless, it was built atop a Roman basilica and, beneath its tallest spire, hung a single bell dot cast from a blackened alloy. No known founders, marked no rope, and yet it rang. 2. The bell's first sound. The first recorded toll of the bell came in 1012 CE during the Easter Vigil. Parishioners had gathered for the night service, their candles forming flickering pools of gold light on the nave's cold floor. The priest, a man named Wulfric, had just begun the exalted when the bell tolled once. Clear, loud, hollow. It startled the congregation so fiercely that one child dropped their candle. Igniting a portion of the rush matting, Wulfric stopped chanting. The crowd stood in silence. Then the bell rang again. No, one had touched it. The belfry door had been sealed since the previous winter. The ladder to reach it had rotted and fallen in disuse. And yet, the sound rang true, measured and deliberate. It was the beginning of something the city would never. Understir NDIIII, the rope that never hung when the church custodian was sent to inspect the bell. He found the belfry untouched. The trap door was latched. There were no footprints in the dust, and no rope, not just detached. Absent, the iron wheel above the bell bore grooves, where a rope once may have hung. But none remained. No scraps, no fibers, no dust pressed where it should have fallen. The bell was hung by a yoke carved from blackened elmer, rare wood, more suited to shipbuilding. It was cold to the touch, even in the summer sun. When they struck the bell with a wooden mallet, it did not sound. Only when left alone in feast days, full moons, or seemingly at random did it toll. Always once, occasionally twice, never 3 times. The tolling and the dead day pattern began to emerge. Every time the bell rang, someone in the surrounding parish died within the week. At first, it was dismissed as superstition. Londonwick was rife with illness, famine, and poor sanitation. But over the next 5 years, local monks began tracking the bell's sound alongside parish deaths. The results were troubling. Of the 32 times the bell was heard in the 1020s, 29 were followed by the death of a named parishioner within 5 days. In 2 other instances, visitors from far-off towns collapsed while passing through the city. Only once did the bell ring with no known death. That toll occurred on the eve of a royal visitant. The king's ship turned back due to weather. The monks began referring to it not as a church bell, but a predictant, an omen, a toll that foretold not worship, but warningv. The bishop's silence in 1028. The Bishop of Canterbury Egbert was petitioned to investigate the ringing without rope. A letter survives in the cathedral archives, translated from Old English. The bell speaks without hand. The dead come after its cry. We beg your holy wisdom to silence the iron. The bishop arrived with a retinue and celebrated mass beneath the bell. Nothing happened. For 3 days he remained. No tolls, no deaths. But on the 4th morning, the bishop was found unconscious at the altar. His lips darkened, his right hand clenched around a broken candle. He survived, but never spoke again. A letter sent by his attending deacon reads only, "He woke before dawn, said he heard a voice in the stone, then no more." The cloister manuscript, 1062. Nearly a century after the first toll, a monk named Cuthbert compiled the secret record, known as the cloister manuscript, now preserved in the Bodleian Library. It contains reports of sudden illnesses in those who mocked the bell, cold patches on the pews directly beneath the spire, a child who recited psalms in Latin despite never being taught the language, only after hearing the bell toll during her christening. The manuscript notes that the bell seemed to respond to silence when left in quiet, when the church was abandoned and unclean. It rang more, when prayed to, sung round, and filled with voices, it fell mute. One chilling entry reads, "The bell hungers not for worship, but for emptiness." 7. The final Tolan, 1087, after the Norman conquest. St. Leontus of the Reign was abandoned. Its stone was quarried for castle foundations. Its nave collapsed in a fire. The bell was left in the ruins, until one stormy night a passerby reported hearing a single toll from beneath the rubble. The next morning, a worker removing stone from the fallen apsors found dead beneath the bell. The bell was missing. 8th. The bell in the museum in 1971. During renovations beneath a pub in Southwark, a Castian bell was uncovered in a collapsed medieval tunnel. It bore no inscription, no marks. Its alloy did not match any known Saxon or Norman formula. Acoustic analysis revealed unusual resonance, tones that caused discomfort when heard in enclosed spaces. Some claimed it whispered. It now rests in the Museum of London, under glass. A plaque reads, "Unattributed bell, circa 11th century, origin unknown, and yet it has been heard to hum faintly on stormy nights, always once, never twice. You are now sitting quietly in the ruins of that forgotten cathedral. The stone around you is damp. The echoes of centuries gone ring gently in the corners. Perhaps the bell never stopped. Perhaps it simply waits for silence again. It is said that if you close your eyes beneath a tall ceiling and listen with the stillness of a candle's breath, you might just hear it. Not a sound to wake you, but a toll to tell you that sleep is near. The whisper in the stone asterisk, the rain is falling now, slow and rhythmic against a roof long since fallen. You are standing, though you don't feel the cold within the hushed breath of old stone. Somewhere above, far above, hangs the bell, or at least, the space where it once hung. And though you know the bell is gone, something deep in your chest tells you, it remembers you. The stone remembers, and somewhere it still tolls not for the living, nor even for the dead, but for those who listen. Let's return to the cathedral that forgot its own name. Let us hear what was never spoken aloud. I, the mason, who dreamed of water in the late 11th century. Decades after the cathedral's partial collapse, a stonemason named Edric of Rye documented a vision he had while working the ruins for salvage stone. His journal, preserved in the margin of a psalter, recounts a dream. The stones drank the rain and gave back none. I walked beneath a sky that rang like copper. The bell hung in fog, and below it no shadow. He awoke drenched in sweat, though the church had been dry. Over the next 7 weeks, he refused to chisel any stone from the cathedral's eastern wall, claiming it whispered back. He was eventually dismissed, but not before he sketched a diagram of the bell's housing, a shape inconsistent with traditional belfries. Instead of a rope wheel, Edric drew a series of chime rods suspended from wooden arms, not unlike a giant wind instrument. He noted cryptically, "It sings when the world forgets itself." Later, builders would use the stone regardless, but at least 2 structures built from those repurposed. Blocks suffered structural failure without storm, fire, or cause.ii. The choir that fell silent in 1121, a small monastic choir from nearby. Barking Abbey attempted to restore the ruins of St. Lintus, led by Abbess Hildegryth. The sisters believed that the silence that held the spire was a curse to be undone by sacred music. They sang daily, morning and night, in the unfinished choir stalls. Gregorian hymns and psalms echoing against broken walls. For 40 days, the bell did not toll. On the 41st, it did twice. The next morning, all 8 nuns were found asleep at their benches. None could be woken until sundown, when they finally stirred. They had forgotten how to speak. One by one, their voices returned, but none could remember the hymns they had sung for weeks. All the scrolls they had transcribed were found blank pages, scraped clean. The abbess, interviewed later by a visiting monk, wrote, "The bell does not like song. The bell wants only the voice of what is missing." 3. The bell and the blacksmith in 1193, during repairs on Southwark Bridge. A blacksmith's apprentice uncovered what was believed to be the cathedral's long-lost bell. It was partially buried in silt and stone, its surface darkened by corrosion. Despite its age, it emitted a soft tone when struck higher than expected, almost shrill. The bell was moved to the blacksmith's forge for assessment. Within days, the apprentice refused to enter the forge. He claimed the bell moved at night, that it rang without echo. The blacksmith, skeptical, attempted to melt it down. The metal refused to yield. He raised the heat. Days passed. The furnace burned hotter than it ever had. Eventually, the forge chimney collapsed inward, extinguishing the fire. The bell, found at the center of the wreckage, was warm to the touch, but unchanged. It was left in a well behind the forge, never. RECOVEREDIV, the cathedral's labyrinth deep beneath the original cathedral. Older than even the Saxon foundation lies a network of tunnels, Roman, perhaps, or older. Few have explored them in the 14th century. During a brief attempt to expand the crypts, masons opened a sealed stairwell that led downward into the rock. A single priest descended, carrying a lantern. He returned 2 hours later, covered in dust, shivering. He spoke only once more before retreating to a hermitage. The bell is not above. It was never above. His journal, scrawled in ash and charcoal, included a single repeated phrase: "There is no rope." There was never a rope. The crypt entrance was resealed with mortar. Later, builders paved over it entirely. But some say that, during certain storms, the wind rushes from Bologna, above. The rope makers, threat among cathedral relics found during a 19th century excavation was a length of rope woven from an unusual blend of flax and bone-white fibers. Experts were baffled. The rope was too smooth, too resilient. It bore no fraying, despite apparent age. Tests could not identify the fiber source, but woven into the cord was a tiny brass clasp shaped like a hand, 3 fingers. Curled inwards, the rope was coiled neatly, no signs of use. Speculation arose. Was this the missing rope? If so, why was it never hung? A letter from 1883, written by the excavation's lead curator, remarks, "The rope hums faintly if left in darkness, as though it misses its bell. The sound that hears, you sound." Scientists studying ancient acoustics often explore how buildings hold frequencies. Some believe old cathedrals retain echoes not just as reflections, but as resonant ghosts, not literal spirits, but lingering vibrations encoded in stone. In 2007, a team recorded ambient sound in the remaining foundation of St. Leontis's apse. Most of the data was noise whined, distant traffic, pigeons. But one night, during a 3 a.m. session, they captured something strange, a tone low, pure, and sustained. It lasted 7.3 seconds, then silence. When played back, listeners describe feeling cold, not scared, but still, disarmed, like someone had spoken your name in a dream. The recording was archived, but not made public. Researchers noted it matched no known bell profile, and it had no echo dot, as if the sound didn't enter the room but had been waiting inside it all along. 7. The cathedral beneath the cathedral. Modern maps show no cathedral at the original site, only vague references. Foundation stones, a few salvaged columns built into shops and houses. But if you walk to a certain alley in Southwark with no name, you'll find a slab of carved stone on the ground. Most passers-by never notice it, but if you stand on it at midnight in winter and hum a single note, some say the stone hums back, not loudly, not enough to frighten, just enough to remind you that beneath this city, beneath centuries of dust and forgetting, the bell waits, and it listens. Some believe the bell is cursed. Some think it is a guardian, a warning, a remnant of an age when worship meant fearing silence more than sin. But maybe the bell was never a thing at all. Maybe it was a question the stone once asked, the sky and never got an answer, and now it waits, patient, resigned, still ready to ring, for you, for no one, for sleep. The toll that time forgot, asterisk the night, is fully here now. The moon, if it shows at all, does so behind ghosting clouds. The city sleeps but somewhere, deep beneath the cobblestone. In stone corridors untouched for centuries, the bell is listening. Is silent, but it is not still. And as we reach the end of our quiet tale, let us walk once more into shadowed halls, through dust-laced vaults and forgotten chapels, to where the toll echoes not from sound but from absence. This is the toll that time forgot. I, the bell-makers, apprentice in 1421, long after St. Lintus was reduced to rubble and ash. A young apprentice in York recorded a dream. His name was Edwin Marlowe, and he was training under a master bellmaker. He had never seen London, yet in his personal ledger, a small sheaf of vellum tied with cord, he sketched a bell. Not one of his masters make, not one of any traditional foundry. It was tall, narrow at the mouth, with strange runes etched around the lip. Above it, he drew a peculiar mechanism, an open framework, with suspended iron rods arranged in arcs like spokes of an unseen wheel. Underneath the drawing, he wrote, "This is the bell I heard in my sleep. It speaks when no one dares. It knows names I do not." He was 13 years old, I. The toll in the towering 1563, during a brutal plague summer. The bell in Southwark Cathedral, formerly St. Mary Overy, rang out one morning before dawn, 3 times. Witnesses say no one was in the tower. The doors were locked. The ropes were secured. The tolling caused panic in the parish, many believing it to be an omen of death, and in truth, by week's end, over 400 had died. When the tower was inspected, nothing was amiss, except for one thing. A scrap of parchment wedged beneath the bell's yoke bore only these words: "The rope is unstrung. The sound remembers the hand. There were no fingerprints, no sign of entry. And when a visiting scholar from Florence heard of the incident, he remarked, "Ah, the bell that doesn't want to be found. I had heard it tolled once in Ravenna." 3. The Ravenna manuscript, indeed. In the archives of the Bibliotheca Classens in Ravenna, there exists a slender codex bound in fishskin vellum. Its title, Vox in Lapid. The voice in stone is written in faded Gothic Latin within a 13th century monk speaks of hearing a bell that answers dreams. that does not call to mass, but to memory, that sounds not in open air, but in sleep. He describes hearing it only once, in a fever, and when it rang, he saw a great cathedral, broken, buried, and breathing. It is, perhaps, coincidence, or perhaps the bell's tolls are not bound by place. Perhaps they belong to wherever silence has lasted longest. For the silent funeral in 1797, a poor parish woman named Anne Crowthorne died in Southwark under strange circumstances. She had no family, no parish records. She was buried in a public grave, but her personal belongings were recorded for parish inventory. Among them, a tiny bronze bell, smaller than a child's fist. Its clapper was missing. Its mouth was sealed with wax. Carved into the base were the words Duma Mea ready. Return to my house. The priest who performed the burial reportedly dreamed of an old church, that night one filled with fog, and with a bell that hung from nothing. He recorded his dream in his notebook. His final line, it rang as I woke, but I heard it still for hours. The audio fragment in 1983. A field researcher named Carla Hume recorded ambient sounds around the site believed to have once held St. Leontus of the Rain. She was studying resonant anomalies in historic ruins. At precisely 3:17 a.m., her recorder picked up an isolated sound, a tolo, long and clear dot. Acoustic engineers later analyzed the sound and determined it did not match the signature of any known bell. More eerily, the sound lacked a decay pattern, meaning it did not fade naturally, but rather stopped. The waveform is sharply cut, as though interrupted. This fragment, when played in controlled environments, reportedly causes discomfort in sensitive listeners. Some describe it as beautiful, others weep. A few refuse to stay in the room until it finishes. Vi, the toll within Usand. Now we ask, what was this bell? Was it an object once made and lost? Or was it an idea shaped in iron, but sustained in memory? Was it a warning, a guardian, a relic, or something more intimate? A toll that rings, not to announce death, but to reveal it. A sound not meant to be heard, but felt in your spine, in your chest. In the moment before sleep, the bell may not be buried under a church. It may not hang from any tower. It may be in you, and when the world is quietest, when no thoughts remain but breath and warmth. It may toll once, never twice, always once. You stand now outside the ruins of that lost cathedral. You feel no fear, only a hush. You wonder who else has heard the Toland, if they knew what it meant. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth, but cold, and when the wind shifts, you're certain you hear something. Not quite a chime, not quite a whisper, but something in between. A question, perhaps, or an answer you've always known. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 4. The manuscript that wrote itself. Marginalia and madness in a monastic. Sell the scribe who vanished behind the page. Good evening, once again, dear listener. You've come so far, through snowfall, through silence, through towers and tolls. Let your breath soften now, as if you're turning the page of a very old book. A book you've opened 100 times, yet still don't understand. Tonight, we enter the stillness of parchment and ink. We descend into the musty calm of a medieval scriptoria room of candles, quills, and the strange power of the written word. This is the story of a manuscript that wrote itself. And the monk who may have disappeared into ITI, the library in the mountain's hour setting, is the 13th century. in a Benedictine abbey clinging to the rocks of a Bohemian hillside, not far from what we now call the Czech Republic. Its name was Abbazia di Lumen, though the locals called it simply the Book. Abbey, by all records, it was small, 20 monks at its peak, cold stone corridors, a cloister garden filled with juniper and yarrow. The chapel's frescoes were worn even in their time, flaked by candle smoke and neglect. But its library was vast, far too vast for an abbey so small. Visitors spoke of books in every language, of scrolls from Alexandria, of papyri, wrapped in linen, of slabs engraved in Aramaic, of volumes whose pages shimmered strangely in moonlight. No census of the collection ever survived. No inventory. Only one manuscript has been traced definitively to the abbey. A book with no title. A book that appears to have been written by no one, too. The manuscript with no authorate was found in 1772, tucked inside a boarded niche behind the altar during a restoration attempt. The volume was thick, bound in goat leather with no title page, just hundreds of folios thick parchment, heavy and yellowed, each lined with precise script. The handwriting was incredibly consistent, line after line, page after page, same slope, same width, same ink, saturation, no variation, impossible for a human hand over such length. And yet, it was written by hand. Microscopic analysis confirmed quill and ink, but no marginalia, no corrections, no bleeding ink, no rest marks. Only after 80 pages do the margins begin to change. 3. Margins. That move the first marginal note appears faintly. A single word, scrawled sideways in the lower corner. Hic, Latin for here. Then nothing for 20 more. Pages, then another. Vides, do you see? From there, the margin notes increase. They begin to form full sentences. Questions, addresses. Who is reading me? Stop where you are. I am still here. My ink has not dried. Some margins are written in reversed Latin, some in Greek, some in pictograms, resembling early Norse runes. They don't appear to relate to the main text and otherwise. Dry theological treatise, but as the pages continue, the margin notes grow longer and stranger. IV. The monk behind the words A later note in the abbey's chronicle speaks of Brother Samuel, the abbey's youngest and most reclusive scribe. He came to the abbey in 1246, offered as an oblate from a local noble family, described as quiet, not mute but reluctant to speak. He took to the scriptorium with eerie precision. Records suggest he could copy texts flawlessly after a single reading. He ate little, slept during the day, preferred candlelight. One friar, in a letter to a nearby abbot, wrote, "The boy writes as though the page moves for him." Then, in 1252, he vanished. His cell was found empty, but his slippers, carefully arranged, were left at the foot of his cot and on his wall, scratched faintly with a nail. "I am within, V." The pages that bleed toward the end of the manuscript. The margins begin to overtake the text. The lines grow tighter. The letters crowd. By page 312, the main body is almost illegible beneath the scrawl of side notes. Some are written upside down. Some curl like vines across the text. One page includes nothing but a long, unbroken sentence. Each time I write, I remember less and become more. And then blank pages, 12 of them, untouched, as if waiting. But on the 13th, in the bottom corner, barely visible, you turned the page, Vi. The manuscript in modern hands. The manuscript now resides in the National Library in Prague, under glass. Scholars visit yearly, hoping to translate the final sections. But something strange persists. Ink samples from different parts of the book are genetically identical, meaning they were likely produced from the same animal over a span of hundreds of pages, and the quill strokes. No sign of fatigue, no trembling, no shifts in pressure. Librarians who've worked closely with the manuscript report strange sensations. Vertigo, déjà vu, dreams of candlelight. One researcher, after weeks of cataloguing the pages, was found asleep at her desk, her notebook filled with notes she did not recall writing, her own handwriting in uniform and unfamiliar. Now you sit with the book before you. Its cover is warm to the touch. Its pages breathe faintly, like linen in the wind. You begin to wonder, is the manuscript still being written? Not by hand. Perhaps not by ink, but in thought, in dream. In memory, was Brother Samuel lost? Or did he become something else? A whisper in parchment, a voice in the margins, a sentence no longer waiting to be finished. The ink that wasn't ink *, the night is deeper now. The wind outside your walls has stilled, and the quiet is thick like parchment left untouched for centuries. You sit, not in a grand cathedral this time, but in a narrow monk's cell, bare, cold, yet pulsing with something ... present. The manuscript lies open, not just before you, but somehow around you. A presence, not a page, as if you're not reading it, but being read by it. Let's turn another folio. Let's walk further into the text. The script that shifts. In 1975, an Austrian paleographer named Klaus Brenner began photographing the entire manuscript for academic analysis. During his inspection of the microfilm copies, he noticed something odd. Pages he remembered photographing were different. Not obviously so, just slightly. In one instance, a Latin sentence that originally read, Dominus est lumen, the Lord is light, now read, Lumen est viator, the light is the traveler. Brenner assumed it was a cataloging error, but upon returning to the physical manuscript, he confirmed the change. No ink had been added, no scraping marks. The original words were simply ... different, and not just. At least 4 instances in the same section showed subtle word shifts, always maintaining grammar, always still theological, but no longer consistent, as if the manuscript was rewriting itself, line by line, within the ink already there. 2. The hidden script using ultraviolet light. Researchers later discovered a faint layer of undertext palimpsest beneath. The initial writing, it was not erased, as in traditional manuscript recycling, but hidden. The undertext appeared in angular characters, some resembling Proto-Cyrillic, others completely unknown. None matched known alphabets or liturgical languages. The pattern suggested a second text written beneath. The main body long before the Latin had been applied. But the most unsettling detail, the undertext followed no line structure, no margins. It coiled in spirals from the center of each page, moving outward, and every spiral on every page began with the same word, intus, within. 3. The ink that wasn't ink chemical. Analysis of the manuscript's ink revealed an unusual composition. Most medieval inks were made from gallnuts, iron salts, and gum arabic, but this ink contained traces of bone, ash human, not animal, microscopic. Particles consistent with cremated bone dust were embedded in the ink's carbon base, likely intentional, possibly symbolic. Bone ink was unheard of in Christian monastic practice. Some funerary traditions in pre-Christian Slavic cultures used bone ash for talismanic writing messages to the dead, or messages from them. But why here? A book of theology, of scripture written in the residue of something human, a body reduced, made into words, IV, the sound in the binding in 1981. A conservator named Eileen Vargo undertook a structural evaluation of the manuscript. She noted the binding threads were unusually taut to taut when gently plucked with a soft tool. The cords emitted faint vibrations, not unlike harp strings. This was dismissed as coincidence until someone suggested tuning them. Using a chromatic tuner, they discovered the threads were tuned to a repeating sequence, F, D, G, A, C. Musicians recognized it as a medieval pentachord used in liturgical chants. The book was tuned to sing, and when played lightly across the binding, its notes matched the melody of a known 12th century hymn, Verbum supernum perdiens. The word descending from above the book was not just to be read, it was to be HEARDV. The Cell, with no window in, 1989. Excavation near the ruins of Abbazia. D. Lumen revealed a small side chamber sealed behind a false wall. It was square, stone-lined. No window, no chimney, no sign of furniture. But on the floor, scratched repeatedly into the same flagstone, tile was a circular pattern etched into it. Enters some. I am within. The walls bore nail scratching, small, shallow, but layered in repetition. They weren't words, they were strokes. Scholars later counted them. The number matched exactly the number of folios in the manuscript. The cell had no door. When found, just the walls, and beneath a loose stone, a quill still intact. The blank page that isn't blank near the manuscript's final quarter is a page that appears utterly blank. Pale parchment, no ink, but when exposed to heat carefully under infrared, the surface reveals hundreds of indentations, not ink, pressure. The page had been written upon, then scraped, or faded without pigment. The impressions show a single, repeated phrase, written hundreds of times. Si me legis, me scribis. If you read me, you write me. Researchers now believe the manuscript's later pages may function as template spaces designed not for new writing, but for echoing old writing through thought alone. That is, by reading the book, you are fulfilling its script, not passively, but actively, like breath through an old flute. The reading room since being displayed in Prague. The manuscript has gained a reputation. Visitors report odd dreams, long corridors, endless hallways of parchment, voices, in narrow cloisters whispering backwards. One woman, a historian of early medieval theology, claimed that after sitting with the manuscript for 20 minutes, she found her hands mimicking the act of writing. Though she held no pen, she later transcribed a short paragraph she believed she received. It read, "The page does not end where the ink stops. The page ends where the reader forgets. You have not yet forgotten." The passage appears nowhere else in known literature, but its cadence, its phrasing, is unmistakably similar to the marginalia of the manuscript itself. You sit now at the table. The book before you is closed, but you feel the whisper behind the vellum, the slow, rhythmic pull of words unspoken. It no longer matters who wrote it, because in your listening, in your remembering, in your wondering, the book continues. You are the margin now. You are the ink. And in that quiet realization, the next page turns. The reader who has written asterisk, you are still, now, deep within the story. The air is heavy with the scent of wax, old leather, and dried ink. The candlelight flickers low. You are no longer just reading a manuscript. You are being read by it. This is not a book you can close, not a tale with a neat end, because some pages do not finish. They wait for someone to see them, wait for someone to hear them, wait for you. Let us now read the final folio, not for closure, but for stillness. The Empty Catalogue in 1938. An archivist named Tomas Bielke began cataloguing the remaining volumes, believed to have come from the now vanished Obbatzia di Lumen, stored in Prague's cathedral annex. The books were dusty, their covers brittle. Most were ordinary psalters, calendars of saints, and fragmented sermons. But among the pile was a small, stitched ledger titled simply Liber Penitentia, the Book of Repentance. Its pages were numbered, but every page was blank, or so it seemed. Under magnification, he noticed faint depressions rose of subtle wave-like marks, too shallow to be words. He traced the indentations. The pattern was not random. When plotted onto parchment using string and ink, it formed a hand, open, palm, facing the reader. Gesture of offering or of warning. This hand matched a strange watermark found faintly embossed on the final page of the self-writing manuscript. A seal. Not a symbol of ownership, but recognition to the voices. Between line sound engineers from Charles University conducted a controlled reading of the manuscript in 2001. Their experiment was simple: record the ambient noise during a silent reading. Of select folios, nothing unusual was expected, but in their audio files, faint tonal shifts appeared. Spectral analysis revealed short bursts of infrasound frequencies, too low for the human ear to perceive, but often felt as unease, shivering, or presence. One technician, after repeated playback, reported hearing his own name in his sleep for several nights. Following. Another found a single line scrawled on the underside of her lab notebook, in handwriting she did not recognize. Where the eye rests, the ink begins again. The recording equipment was checked. No tampering, just the hush of turning pages, and a presence between words. 3. The reader's illness in 1879. A monk named Brother Daniel of Olomouc was granted access to the manuscript under special dispensation. A scholar of apocalyptic scripture, he believed the margins contained lost Gnostic verses. He read the manuscript continuously for 21 days. By the end of his study, he refused to speak anything but what he called page thoughts, fragmented sentences in alternating Latin and Czech. He was committed to a cloistered hospital, where he spent his final months writing pages of mirrored script impossible to decipher, unless held to a candle in a mirror. One recurring phrase appeared across dozens of pages. If you understand me, you are me. His final act before death. He tried to eat a piece of parchment. When stopped, he whispered, "The page cannot leave the book." For the memory within the margins, one of the most enduring mysteries, remains this: why does the manuscript appear? To know its reader? Over centuries, several independent readers, cross languages, countries, and belief systems have recorded eerily similar visions. A hallway of endless doors, each labeled with a number. A cloister filled with mirrors, but no reflection. A child writing on a wall with ink that moves like smoke. A voice saying, "You are what's left unwritten." These were never shared among participants. yet they recur. Linguist Tatiana Sovnik, after spending 40 hours studying the marginalia, collapsed from exhaustion and fever. In her hospital journal, she wrote, "I was not reading, I was being remembered. No pathogens were found." She recovered, but she refused to enter a library again. The page that follows youth's last folio of the manuscript is strange. It bears no ink, no watermark, but its grain is wrong. Unlike the other pages, this one flexes in humidity and occasionally emits a soft crackling noise, like distant parchment being turned. Visitors to the manuscript have reported the unsettling sensation that this final page watches them. Some claim the page has turned on its own when left open overnight. Others say they've seen words appear faintly in condensation, then vanish. One child, visiting with her scholar parents, touched the final page and whispered, "It's me, I'm already inside." She had never read the manuscript before. The sentence that writes itself over time. A theory has formed, not official, but whispered among esoteric scholars. The manuscript does not write itself. It rewrites you in every reader. It plants phrases of thought, borrowed structures of syntax, ways of speaking that feel familiar, but are not. Like a melody stuck in the mind, like an echo, long after the bell has stopped ringing. And if you listen closely to your own thoughts, even now, you might hear something that wasn't yours before. A word, a line, a sentence waiting to be finished. You are not afraid. There is no danger here. Only quiet, only pages turned by breath, and ink that remembers touch. As you prepare to rest, perhaps to dream, you carry something with you. Not a mystery to be solved, not even a story to be told, but a sentence, soft, slow, and endless. I am within, and somewhere in the stillness, between now and sleep. That sentence continues. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 5. The royal pantry, what kings ate, what servants stole, and what nobody touched, the feast that was never served. Asterisk, good evening once more. Nestle in, let your mind grow heavy. Let the soft rustling of sleep surround you like the folds of an old linen curtain. Tonight, we don't wander far from firelight. Instead, we descend into stone cellars and banquet halls lined with tapestries. We peek into kitchens where brass pots bubble slowly, where flavors were measured in silence, and where the greatest secrets of medieval royalty were never spoken, aloud but plated carefully, hidden beneath silver lids. This is not the story of kings and queens as rulers. This is the story of what they ate, or more curiously, what they did not. Let's begin with a feast that never happened. Happeenedi, the invitation in the winter of 1349. As snow settled softly over the Polish countryside, a royal feast was planned in Krakow-Eswal Castle. It was to celebrate the end of mourning for Queen Aldona, who had died the previous year. Her husband, Casimir III, known as Casimir the Great, ordered a feast to display both prosperity and piety, a public return to life after grief. The invitations were illustrated on embossed parchment, sealed with wax and perfumed with violet oil. Nobles from Hungary, Bohemia, and the Teutonic Order were summoned. Bakers, brewers, and butchers worked for weeks. Herbs were brought in from as far as Genoa. A live sturgeon was transported in a brine barrel, but the feast never occurred. On the morning it was to take place, the great hall was found abandoned. The tables were laid, the candles were lit, the wine was poured, but no guests arrived, and no one ever gave. A reason the cellar with two locks beneath wall castle lies a labyrinth of storage rooms. One of them, discovered only in the 1970s, was hidden behind a stone panel and required 2 keys to open. One key was carried by the head steward, the other by the Queen's personal apothecary. Inside, 30 barrels of preserved game, sacks of saffron and sugar, sealed clay pots of rendered duck fat, and shelves of dried rose petals used for sweets and perfumes. But one shelf was different. It held a series of wooden boxes, each labeled in Latin, aurum reductum, reduced. Gold, a term used in medieval alchemy, likely powdered saffron or turmeric. Sanguis, avis, blood of the bird. Radix somni, root of sleep. These were not food. These were additives used in trace amounts to alter the body, the mind, and perhaps the soul. Recipes were not found, but the final box was labeled only nan tangere. Do not touch it. Was empty. 3. The table that was too wide royal. Feasts were carefully engineered performances equal parts. Politics and ritual. The width of the king's table in Wall's great hall was unusually large, over 6 feet across. Guests never sat beside the monarch. They sat across from him, watched him eat, toasted him, but rarely spoke to him. Food arrived in layers of ceremony, tasters, trumpeters, then the servants who carried the covered trays. The king's dish was always placed in silence. One servant would bow, step back, and only then was the cover lifted. But Casimir's feast table, historians note, had a peculiar addition, embedded drain beneath the king's plate. The drain led nowhere. A stone pipe sealed at the end, a trap, a disposal, or just ... an old superstition. We don't know, but the presence of that silent drain, hidden beneath a carved floral motif, remains one of the most unsettling details in Polish royal architecture. IV. The stolen pears, one of the only surviving records from the aborted feast, is a criminal punishment scroll. A cook's apprentice, name illegible, was lashed 10 times for stealing pears meant for the Queen Mother. This was not unusual. Pilfering food was a constant risk in medieval kitchens, where temptation simmered beside hunger. But in the margins of the scroll, the castle scribe added a strange note. The fruit was soft, too soft. It wept when pierced. Whether poetic or literal, we do not know. The pears, it seems, had been soaked in something unusual, and they were never served. The dish with no name feast. Records often listed courses in detail: roast peacock, almond, pudding, pottage of eel. But on the planned menu for this 1349 feast, between blanched almonds in rose syrup and boar's leg in red wine, appears one line scratched out with deep ink, prepared under moonlight. Serve last. No dish name, no ingredients, just an instruction. Serve last. In medieval superstition, moonlight preparation suggested dream-inducing food, something not meant to nourish, but to ... alter, perhaps a symbolic offering or a sedative for the weary ... But in the space for guests' preferences, many nobles had the same handwritten note: to be absent if served. They knew ... the door that locked from outside on the morning of the feast. All service staff were accounted for, but the great hall was locked from the outside. Inside, food was cooling, candles burning, no signs of struggle, no broken cups or overturned chairs. It was as if the feast had been laid. For no one, Casimir, in his later chronicles, never mentioned the feast. Only a vague phrase in his diary that winter: We prepared the table. But God did not arrive. You are now seated at that long, empty table. The torches flicker against golden goblets. You feel the warmth of roasted pheasant, the sweetness of honeyed bread, the distant cold of wine that will not be drunk. But no, one else comes. The feast is not for celebration, it is for memory, a table laid for absence, and beneath it all, something else waits. A question, perhaps, or a guest that never left. Beneath the table, beyond the feast asterisk, the flames are lower now, casting soft gold over the worn tapestries of your imagination. You are seated once more in the royal hall, not as a noble or servant, but as a silent observer in a chair no one notices. Before you, a feast remains uneaten. Dishes steam gently in the cold air, untouched, as if waiting for someone who has not yet arrived, or someone who was never meant to arrive at all. In this second part of the tale, we descend beneath the great hall into the cellars, the corridors, the pantries, and the minds of those who prepared meals not for sustenance but for something stranger. For those who fed royalty were not just cooks, they were watchers and sometimes messengers. Aye, the pantry of shadows, historical inventories of war castles' lower levels, list dozens of food stores, salted meats, cheeses wrapped in waxed cloth, onions braided and hung from beams, garlic woven into ropes for ritual and recipe alike. But one room the West underpantried does not appear until the late 1400s, a narrow stone chamber with shelves, carved directly into the walls. It contained only 3 kinds of items: earthenware, bowls filled with dried mushrooms of unknown species, small linen sachets filled with black powder, labeled only with dots, wooden plates carved with concentric circles, some faintly marked with notches. No known recipe book mentions these combinations. No known banquet account lists them served. Yet the logs list these items as being refreshed weekly, as if someone or something was consuming them in silence. 2. The cook who would not, speaking 1348, just a year before the aborted feast. A new cook was assigned to the palace staff, his name unknown. He appears in records only as Mute One, southern complexion, and is referred to by other servants as the listener. Despite his silence, his skills were revered. He introduced flavor combinations unfamiliar to polished palates: stewed dates in vinegar, preserved fish in rosewater, clove-dusted marrow. One dish, served to the Queen Mother weeks before her death, was described as soft as prayer, bitter as sleep. But when questioned about his ingredients, he never responded. He vanished the morning after the Queen Mother died. All that remained was a locked satchel containing folded wax paper, each sheet etched with a word in Arabic: taste, smell, know, remember, forget. No one could read them at the time. They were burned. 3. The stewards. Confession in a parchment fragment dated spring of 1351, 2 years after the aborted feast walls. Chief steward, a man named Janusz Wolik, left a confession. Discovered. Behind a loose board in the pantry wall, it reads, "I am not guilty for the feast." The plates were set, as instructed. The wines were warmed. The doors locked as told. I did not see who took the first bite, but when I returned, the food was still warm. He ends with a line strange in tone. The feast was not meant to feed. It was meant to bind. Bind what? A pact, a spirit, or perhaps a memory. For the recipes of no origin, several pages of a 14th century recipe book, preserved in Krakow's Jagiellonian library, are attributed to feasts of state and soul. The first few recipes are familiar: pottages, duck glazed in honey, almond milk custards. But near the end, the recipes grow. Abstract, one instructs: take the dream of a red bird, mix with tears of the window, serve on silence. Another: to prepare the king's third plate, the cook must first sleep beneath the stars, facing east, with nutmeg on the tongue and wormwood at the feet. These are not metaphors. The page margins include notes. Queen wept after second bite. Remove before dawn. Only feed if moon is dark. Such entries suggest a knowledge of the body not as flesh, but as vessel, food. Here was ritual. Key, catalyst. Not all banquets were for celebration. Some were for unlocking doors. Best left unopened. V. The knife without a handle among walls. Artifacts recovered in the 20th century was a peculiar tool stored with the royal cutlery. It appeared to be a carving knife, but made entirely of bone, no metal, no handle, only a polished curve of pale ivory inscribed with tightly coiled script. Its edge was dull, yet it was stored in a leather sheath, bound in iron thread. The tag read, "Do not use. Only show. Show to whom? The royal family. The food." The knife was never listed in feasts, but appears in 2 paintings tucked in the belt of the king's food taster. In both it's untouched, unused, but always present, an object of ritual. Not function, vi. The meal that left no waste one. Of the more puzzling details in the aborted feast of 1349 is the absence of refuse. Typically, royal feasts left behind piles of waste, bones, rinds, torn cloth napkins, splashes of wine, half-teen trenches of bread. But the great hall was immaculate. The food, though untouched, appeared unspoiled. The goblets were full, but the pitchers were light. It was as if the food had been consumed, but left unchanged. The bread held no bite marks. The meat still steamed. The only disruption was a smear of something, dark reddish, brown on the corner of the king's chair. Tests in the 1960s confirmed dried honey, wine and trace iron, not blood, but clothes. You are seated now beneath the great table, where no guests came. You smell the herbs clinging to the air, thyme, vinegar, cloves, the low sweetness of overripe apples. The plates gleam. The chairs wait. You are not hungry, but you understand. This feast was not to fill, it was to remember, to preserve, to hold something in place. Not a person, not even a soul, but a silence, a ritual, a taste, and once tasted, never forgotten. Hunger, ritual, and the silence of the spoon, asterisk, it is very quiet now. You are deeper underground than before, below the castle kitchens, beneath the wine cellars, beneath the carved stone arches that support the grand halls of feast and firelight. There is no warmth here, only storage jars, long sealed, rusted hinges, and utensils that haven't moved in centuries. In this final section, we explore what it means to feed someone with purpose, what it means to offer a meal not to satisfy but to shape, to bind, to preserve power, or perhaps contain it, because some royal meals were not meals at all. They were messages, spoken in salt, sealed with honey, and swallowed with silence. The pantry with no door with, in the deepest foundations of War Castle, lies a chamber unlike the rest. No doorway leads to it. It was discovered in 1921, only after an earthquake damaged part of the old servants' corridor. beneath a wall that once held spice racks. Workers found a hollow pocket of air roughly 7 feet wide, hexagonal in shape, with smooth walls carved from stone that did not match the rest of the fortress. Inside were 3 objects: a silver spoon, tarnished black, with a shallow bowl and no engraving; a square of dark cloth wrapped around a flat oval stone; a folded parchment containing one line written in Latin: "The hunger is not in the stomach, but in the silence." No food, no jars, no barrels, only the implication of a meal never served, or one too sacred to plate. The spoon was not decorative. It bore microscopic scratches used repeatedly by someone with trembling hands. 2. The unopened recipe among the culinary scrolls of the royal kitchen, preserved now in Krakow's libraries, a parchment rolled tightly and sealed with hardened wax. It has never been opened, not by scholars, historians, or priests. The seal bears the crest of King Casimir's personal physician, a serpent coiled around a mortar, beneath the Latin phrase, venet post gustum. It comes after tasting. No one knows what the scroll contains, but near it, in the same archival box, lies a small ivory token carved with a spoon on one side and on the other. Serve in silence, eat in prayer. Some believe the scroll contains instructions for a spirit dish, a ritual food meant to draw memory or vision, a meal never meant for the body alone. To open the recipe might break its spell, and so it remains sealed, perhaps rightly so. 3. The King Who Ate in the Miraran. Obscure journal, written by a Venetian ambassador visiting the Polish court in the 1350s, recounts a peculiar detail about King Casimir III. He writes, "His Majesty dines with only his scribe and a mirror." The mirror, according to the journal, was propped behind the king's plate. Its frame was carved with lilies, its glass backed with fine tin. The king would not begin eating until the mirror was polished. No servant could look into it, and if the reflection was obscured, the king would fast. It was believed the mirror confirmed the meal, whatever that meant. One servant recorded as having glanced at it was dismissed and banished within hours. But before he left, he whispered to another, "The mirror did not show the king. It showed the feast, ... but empty, for the bread that broke the taste of the role of the royal taster was sacred." They were not chosen for loyalty, but for health. A taster had to be in perfect physical balance, neither too thin nor too rich, neither too young nor too old. Their body was a Gaugian alchemical sensor, able to detect imbalance in a dish even before death occurred. In 1352, the king's tasterbores. A man trained since childhood collapsed after sampling a single bite of barley bread. Not poisoned, not poisoned, not ill. Simply, ... collapsed. He recovered hours later, dazed, and said, "There was no taste. It was all memory. I remembered things I never lived." He could not eat bread again. He became a monk. And for the rest of his life, he wrote only one sentence over and over in his ledger: "Not all hunger is for food. The feast for thee." Uninvited, according to oral traditions passed through the kitchen staff of Wall Castle, there was one night each winter when a strange ritual was performed. No date was ever consistent, but when the time came, the hearths were stoked, and a single table was laid in the servants' hall, not the great hall above. The dishes were simple: warm milk, unsweetened bread, apples, baked whole, skins blistered but uncut. No one was allowed to eat. The food remained overnight. In the morning, it was gone. No crumbs, no spills, just empty bowls and folded napkins. The cooks said the feast was for the ones who remember the hunger, and if they weren't fed, the cellars would rot. Vi. The pantry that fell silent in 1370, after the death of Casimir III. An inventory was taken of Wall's entire kitchen complex. It noted 48 barrels of salted pork, 200 loaves of black rye, 12 preserved herons, 2 jars labeled Tears of the Boar, likely vinegar-based marinade, but 1 pantry once. Bustling was now quiet. No deliveries, no requests, no signs of use, the steward wrote. The room where the tongue rests no longer speaks. The knives there are dull. The spices still sweet, but nothing calls for them. That pantry was bricked up the following year. Its door was never recorded again. You are seated now, not at the king's table, not even at the servants' bench, but somewhere older, somewhere quieter, a stone niche, a candle stub, a wooden bowl with nothing in it but scent and memory. You do not eat, you remember. You are full not with food, but with presence, because the royal pantry was never truly about consumption. It was about containment and what it tried to hold. In through honey, meat, ash, and oil still stirs in silence. Beneath sealed doors and empty plates. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place.